Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes, and these are the 5 big stories for today. Usually I do 3, sometimes 4. There's just a lot to cover. Okay, first story. Bulgarian president says Ukraine's victory over Russia is impossible. Well, if you declare it's impossible, it certainly becomes impossible. That didn't mean it's possible before. It could be impossible, but if it is possible and you declare it impossible, you undercut yourself. Does that make sense? Just logically. Okay, let's look at a little bit of what he had to say. Bulgarian President Radev has called Ukraine's victory over Russia impossible. So Bulgaria is joining Prime Minister Fico from Slovakia and Hungarian Prime Minister Orban in making this kind of claim. These are all neighbors. I mean, it's a very frustrating thing, I'm sure, for the Ukrainians. And he linked the war to an assassination attempt over Slovak Prime Minister Fico. Well, we don't know yet that that's the case. That may or may not be the case, but he's claiming it as if it is. Every day this war continues is disastrous for Ukraine, Russia, and all of us. Well, but that's not Ukraine's problem. That's not like Ukraine's fault that it's a disastrous thing. He should be saying, Russia, stop it, knock it off, don't do this. This is wrong. You're upending world order. This inevitably affects all elections in Europe, in the United States, and everywhere in the world. We will choose in this and the next election between war and peace. Okay, let's stop there for a second. Not every peace is good peace. I want peace as well, but I don't want peace at the price of liberty, right? And that's what this really amounts to. Every citizen is obliged to understand this. A little bit further down, he says, Radev called for political efforts for peace rather than weapons provision. With weapons, without weapons, we are going into a similar outcome. We have to realize that. And again, this is where you already are assuming the answer that you want by saying we can't possibly win. So, and if that's the case, you can't possibly win. We have to realize that the difference will be thousands of human casualties and a devastated country, Ukraine, for which recovery we will have to pay, he pointed out, adding that it is inevitable. Okay, so again, he's towing a very common Russian talking point. The Ukrainians can't win. More weapons are just prolonging the pain. Okay, yet Ukraine wants the weapons so that they can have a fighting shot at it. Okay. Let's go on to the next story. Estonian Prime Minister, NATO training soldiers in Ukraine won't escalate the war. And she's made this case. And she said, I can't possibly imagine that if somebody was hurt there, then those who have sent their people will say, it's Article 5, let's bomb Russia. It's not how it works. It's not automatic. Moreover, she wouldn't be sending her troops to the front lines. She'd be sending some to the rear to train Ukrainian soldiers. So there's that. Okay, Estonian Defense Minister, in contrast, said on May 14th that the idea of sending Western troops to Ukraine has not advanced either in Estonia or at the EU level, since, quote, there is no clear understanding among the allies what it would bring, unquote. So there's a little of a division here, but Lithuania has already said something very similar. Let me say one more thing about the Estonian Prime Minister. She also stated that some countries have already sent their instructors to Ukraine to train Ukrainian soldiers. I'm not sure who that is. If you know who that is, please put a comment or a link below so that I can follow up on that. The Lithuanian Prime Minister said on May 8th, I think it was, May 8th, yeah, I think it was May 8th, Lithuania remains open to the deployment of ground troops in Ukraine as part of training missions for Ukrainian soldiers. Prime Minister said in a story published on May 8th, she told the Financial Times that her NATO and EU member state is prepared to send soldiers on training missions. Okay, so there's that. Once the first group is through the door, though, it'll make it very easy for others to follow. And you'll see that in the next article. The chairman of the French Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Assembly demands that France change its doctrine and no longer prohibits Ukraine from striking inside Russian territory. Remember what I just said? Well, British Prime Minister, I think it was the British Prime Minister, no, British Defense Secretary said just that Ukraine can use whatever weapons in whatever way they have from Britain to strike inside Russian territory if need be. So once the door is opened, it's easy for the French then. It's easier, not necessarily easy, but easier for the French to follow. This change in doctrine is perfectly legitimate insofar as it puts an end to the unacceptable asymmetry in the situation of the aggressor and that of the aggressed. In the name of what can we deny the Ukrainians the right to respond blow for blow to the attacks for which they are victims? That's a really good question. Like, on what grounds can we say, no, you can't do this? Because it's French-made weapons? Well, that seems absurd. Like, let them be able to take the fight to the Russians so that they can end this war. Okay. Europe sees signs of Russian sabotage but hesitates to blame the Kremlin, says an article in the Wall Street Journal. And Anton Gurashenko did a good job highlighting some of the key components. I'm just going to go through a few of his highlights. It smells like Russia. It looks like Russia. So European investigators are increasingly seeing the fingerprints around recent acts of suspected sabotage on strategic infrastructure, but are struggling to respond. The Wall Street Journal writes, German prosecutors last month detained two dual Russian-German nationals suspected of spying for Moscow with the goal of disrupting Western military assistance to Ukraine through sabotage. And it doesn't stop there. Britain's cyber intelligence agency, GCHQ, is increasingly concerned about growing links between the Russian intelligence services and proxy groups to conduct cyber attacks. Authorities believe Moscow is using civilian equipment for spying and sabotage, and the hits go on and on. There's something about Chinese down here with Germany. Officials and investigators say they suspect Russia could have been behind an attack on the railroad that temporarily halted all rail traffic in the north of the country in October 2022. In January 2022, before the war, Russia was positioning its forces to attack Ukraine. There was a Russian fishing trawler. It was detected traversing the icy waters above a major fiber optic cable around the time it was cut. The cable carried data from one of the largest commercial satellite ground stations in the world. The Russian trawler crisscrossed more than 100 times over the exact spot where the cable was cut. How about that? Again, his final comment here, it smells like Russia, it looks like Russia, but they haven't yet accused them. Okay, last story, this happened yesterday. The president of Iran died in a helicopter crash. It doesn't look like there was any monkey business, just flying in the mountains and, didn't see the mountain. Nonetheless, Putin was one of the first to express condolences over the death of the brutal tyrant Raisi, calling him a, quote, true friend of Russia, unquote. Later, Belarusian dictator Lukashenko called the Iranian president, quote, a true friend of Belarus, unquote, and also expressed his condolences. It's worth noting that Raisi has visited Russia several times as Iran's president, including after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russia buys weapons from Iran, in particular Shahed-type attack drones used for mass attacks on Ukrainian cities. ISW talks about this as well. Raisi's death would have serious implications for Iran's supreme leader's succession, as he was considered a top contender alongside of Khamenei's son. So the president is actually below the supreme leader. His demise wouldn't change the regime's hardline trajectory, but it looks like it's going to cause, now there's a senior vice president or something along those lines that is next in the line of succession who will be there for 50 days until they can have an election, but there's going to be some jockeying for position for those who are trying to come to power. But I agree, I don't think that this is going to change anything about Iran's trajectory. But Darth Putin's words here, I think, are very valuable here. Darth Putin is a parody account. Try to live your life such that people don't set off lots of fireworks when you die. Okay, my friends, thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Tell me what you thought about this in the comments below. Thank you to my patrons, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.